I was called immature for my horror decor and my GF left me. Now I run a successful podcast and her family wants to learn about horror. I'm Gilbert, 32M, and I've been dating Patricia, 29F, for about 8 months now. To understand this situation, you need to know that I'm not just a casual horror fan, it's been my life's passion since I was a kid. My obsession started when I was 10 and my older brother snuck me into a showing of The Exorcist. Instead of being terrified, I was fascinated by the special effects and storytelling. From that moment on, I was hooked. Throughout my teens and 20s, I poured every spare dollar into building my collection. I worked part-time jobs all through high school just to fund my hobby. My parents thought it was just a phase, but here I am, 2 decades later, still just as passionate. My house is basically a shrine to all things spooky. I've got life-size cutouts of classic monsters, framed posters of horror icons, prop replicas, and even some original artwork commissioned from horror artists I've met at conventions over the years. One of my prized possessions is a screen-used prop from The Thing. It cost me a small fortune, but it's my most treasured item. I've also got a complete collection of every issue of Fangoria magazine, neatly preserved in protective sleeves. My bookshelves are packed with horror novels, many of them signed first editions. It's not just decor, it's a carefully curated collection that represents years of dedication and love for the genre. Patricia knew about my horror obsession from the start. On our first date, I took her to a local horror-themed escape room. She was a good sport about it, even though she jumped at every scare. She's not into horror herself, but she seemed to appreciate my passion for it. She even bought me a vintage creature from the Black Lagoon poster for my birthday last month, which I thought was really thoughtful. I should mention that I'm child-free by choice. It's a decision I made years ago, partly because I want to focus on my career and hobbies, and partly because I've never felt that parental instinct. Patricia knows this about me. She doesn't have kids either, but she's very involved with her nieces and nephews. It's never been an issue between us before. The problem started last weekend when Patricia asked if we could host her niece's 10th birthday party at my place. I've got a nice backyard with a pool, and Patricia thought it would be perfect for a summer party. I agreed, figuring it would be a good chance to meet more of her family too. To prepare for the party, I spent a whole day moving most of the more intense decor into my spare room. The giant Pennywise statue that usually greets visitors in the hallway, my zombie head collection that normally sits on the mantle, the hyper-realistic werewolf mask I have displayed in the living room, all of it went into the spare room. I left up some of the tamer stuff like movie posters and my collection of vintage horror novel covers. I didn't lock the spare room because my cats like to wander and I don't usually close any doors except my office. The party seemed to be going well at first. The kids were having fun in the pool, the adults were chatting and enjoying the barbecue I'd set up. I was feeling pretty good about how things were going. But then I overheard some commotion inside. Apparently, a few of the kids had wandered into the spare room and gotten freaked out by all the horror stuff. Patricia's sister Amy, 34F, came stomping out to the backyard, demanding to know why I had such inappropriate things in my house with children around. I tried to explain that I'd moved most of it away specifically for the party, but she wasn't having it. She said I should have locked the door or gotten rid of it entirely. I was pretty annoyed at this point. These weren't toddlers, they were 9 to 10-year-olds who should know better than to snoop in other people's houses. I told Amy maybe she should teach her kids to respect other people's privacy instead of blaming me. In hindsight, I probably could have phrased that more diplomatically, but I was frustrated at being attacked in my own home. This set off a whole argument. Patricia's other sister Megan, 31F, joined in, saying I was being insensitive to the children. Patricia tried to play peacekeeper but I could tell she was embarrassed. The party kind of fell apart after that, with Amy and Megan taking their kids home early. Later that night, Patricia and I had a big fight about it. She said I should have been more careful knowing kids would be over. I countered that I'd already gone out of my way to accommodate them by moving most of my stuff. I pointed out that I'd spent hours prepping for this party, cleaning the house, setting up the barbecue, buying kid-friendly snacks, all for her family. I felt like my efforts weren't being appreciated. Then Patricia dropped a bombshell. She thinks I should redecorate my whole house to be more family-friendly. Apparently, she wants to have her nieces and nephews over more often, and thinks my decor will traumatize them. She suggested I could keep one room for my spooky stuff but that the rest of the house should be more neutral. I was shocked. This is my home that I worked hard for. I bought this house 2 years ago after saving for years, and one of the things I was most excited about was finally having space to properly display my collection. My horror collection is a huge part of who I am. I've been collecting some of these pieces for over a decade. The idea of getting rid of it all or hiding it away is unthinkable to me. I told Patricia absolutely not. I'm child-free by choice and while I don't mind kids visiting occasionally, I'm not changing my whole lifestyle for them. I explained that my home is my sanctuary, the place where I can fully express myself. Asking me to change that is like asking me to change a fundamental part of who I am. Patricia got upset and said if I cared about her, I'd be willing to compromise. She accused me of prioritizing toys over our relationship. I was hurt by this dismissal of something that's so important to me. These aren't just toys, they're pieces of art, bits of film history, Things that bring me joy every day. We've been in a cold war since then. Patricia is giving me the silent treatment and her sisters have been blowing up my phone calling me selfish and immature. They've said things like, when are you going to grow up and stop playing with monster dolls? And a real man would put family first. It's been really hurtful. I'm starting to wonder if I misjudged how accepting Patricia was of my hobby. In the past, she's made comments about how she finds it cute that I'm so into horror, but now I'm wondering if she always saw it as something I'd eventually grow out of. Am I really the asshole here? I feel like I'm being asked to change a fundamental part of myself for people who aren't even in my immediate family. At the same time, I care about Patricia and don't want this to ruin our relationship. But I also don't want to set a precedent of always giving in to unreasonable demands. What should I do? Edit. Wow, this blew up overnight. Thanks for all the responses. To clarify a few things, Patricia and I had discussed kids before. She knows I'm child-free but loves being an aunt. We agreed that was fine as long as it didn't impact our relationship too much. My house isn't like a haunted house attraction. It's mostly posters, collectibles, and some prop replicas. Nothing gory or super explicit. I did warn Patricia about the spare room before the party. She said it would be fine and the kids probably wouldn't go in there anyway. This is the first time Patricia's really pushed back on my hobby. Before this, she seemed supportive, even if she didn't share my enthusiasm. I'll post an update once I've had a chance to talk things through with Patricia. Thanks again for the input everyone. Update 1. Hey everyone, thanks for all the advice and support on my last post. A lot has happened in the past week, so I wanted to give you all an update. The day after I made my post, Patricia came over to talk. I was hoping we could have a calm discussion, but it quickly turned into another argument. She doubled down on her stance that I needed to change my decor, saying she couldn't see a future with someone who prioritized childish horror stuff over family. I tried to explain how important my collection was to me, both sentimentally and financially. I told her about how I'd saved for years to buy some of these pieces, how each item had a story behind it. I showed her the Fangoria magazines I'd collected since I was 14, telling her about how I'd mowed lawns all summer to afford my first subscription. I pointed out the movie poster signed by my favorite director when I met him at a convention, a memory I treasure. But Patricia dismissed it all as just stuff and said I was being selfish for not considering her feelings. She said she felt uncomfortable bringing her family to a house that looked like Halloween threw up in it. This hurt because I've always taken pride in how I've displayed my collection. It's not haphazard or messy, everything is carefully arranged and well maintained. Then she dropped another bombshell. Apparently, she'd already promised her family that I would tone things down so the kids could visit more often. She'd even invited them over for dinner next weekend without asking me first. She said she thought surprising me would motivate me to make changes quickly. I was furious. Not only was Patricia trying to dictate how I decorated my own home, but she was making promises on my behalf without my consent. It felt like a huge breach of trust. I told her that I felt blindsided and manipulated. The argument got pretty heated. Patricia accused me of not being serious about our relationship and said she was starting to think we weren't compatible. She said that at our age, we should be thinking about building a life together, not clinging to childhood obsessions. I countered that if she really cared about me, she wouldn't try to change such a big part of who I am. I asked her if she'd ever really accepted this part of me or if she'd always been waiting for me to grow out of it. In the end, Patricia left in tears and we didn't speak for a few days. I was hurt and confused, wondering if I was really being unreasonable. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about decor, it was about respect and boundaries. During this time, I found myself reflecting on past relationships. I remembered an ex-girlfriend from college who had also been uncomfortable with my horror collection. She'd asked me to hide it whenever her friends came over, saying it embarrassed her. That relationship had ended badly, with me feeling like I couldn't be myself. I'd promised myself then that I wouldn't compromise on this part of my identity again. I decided to reach out to Patricia's cousin Emma, 30F, who I'd met at a family gathering a few months back. Emma's always seemed level-headed and I thought she might be able to give me some insight into Patricia's family dynamics. Emma was really helpful. She explained that Patricia's always been the peacekeeper in their family, often going out of her way to make everyone else happy. Apparently, Patricia's sisters have a habit of taking advantage of this, constantly asking Patricia to babysit or run errands for them. Emma said Patricia often feels torn between her own desires and her family's expectations. Emma also revealed something interesting. Patricia had confided in her a few weeks ago about feeling pressured by her family to settle down and have kids soon. Patricia's parents had apparently made some comments about her biological clock ticking, and her sisters were always talking about how great parenthood is. This made me wonder if Patricia's sudden insistence on making my place child-friendly was more about appeasing her family than actual concern for the kids. Armed with this new perspective, I invited Patricia over to talk again. This time, I started by asking her how she really felt about our future together, separate from her family's expectations. I wanted to understand if this was really about the decor or if there were deeper issues we needed to address. Patricia broke down and admitted she'd been feeling torn. She said she loved me and respected my child-free choice, but was struggling with pressure from her family. She confessed that part of her push for redecorating was an attempt to show her family that we could still be family-oriented without having kids of our own. She thought if my house looked more normal, her family would stop making comments about when we were going to have children. I sympathized with Patricia's position but explained that compromising my personal space and identity wasn't the solution. We had a long, honest talk about our values, future goals, and what we both needed from this relationship. I shared my past experiences and fears about losing myself in a relationship. Patricia opened up about her insecurities and the pressure she feels from her family. We realized that we had both made assumptions and failed to communicate effectively. I acknowledged that I could have been more understanding of her family obligations, and she admitted that she should have talked to me before making promises to her family. In the end, we agreed that we both needed some time to think things over. We're taking a 2-week break to reflect on whether we can find a middle ground or if our lifestyles are truly incompatible. Patricia is going to talk to her family about respecting our choices, and I'm going to consider if there are any compromises I'd be comfortable with in terms of my decor. I'm not sure what's going to happen, but I feel better having had an open conversation. I'll update again once we've had our time apart and made a decision about our future. For now, I'm focusing on self-reflection and trying to envision what a future with Patricia might look like, and whether it's something I truly want. Update 2. Hey everyone, I'm back with another update. It's been about a month since my last post, and a lot has changed. After our 2-week break, Patricia and I met up to talk things through. We chose a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop we both like, to have this important conversation. We both came prepared, having spent the time apart really thinking about what we wanted and needed. We had a long, honest conversation about our relationship, our values, and our vision for the future. It wasn't easy, but we both realized that we had some fundamental differences that we couldn't ignore. Patricia admitted that she'd been downplaying her desire for a more traditional family life. She confessed that while she respected my choice to be child-free, she'd always hoped I might change my mind eventually. The horror decor issue was just a symptom of a larger incompatibility. She explained that she'd always imagined having a home where she could host family gatherings, where her nieces and nephews could come over anytime without her worrying about what they might see. She realized that she wanted a partner who shared her vision of a family-centric life. For my part, I acknowledged that I hadn't been entirely fair to Patricia either. I realized I'd been dismissive of her family obligations and hadn't made enough effort to find compromises that would make her feel comfortable in my space. I admitted that I sometimes prioritized my collection over her feelings, and that wasn't fair in a partnership. We talked about our different ideas of the future. I shared my dreams of turning one room of my house into a mini museum of horror memorabilia, maybe even opening it up for tours during Halloween. Patricia talked about her hopes of having a home where she could host Christmas dinners and Easter egg hunts for her family. As we talked, it became clear that our visions for the future were fundamentally different. We both wanted the other to be happy, but we realized that might not be possible if we stayed together. In the end, we made the difficult decision to end our relationship. It was painful, but we both agreed it was better to part ways now rather than resent each other down the line. We agreed that we'd rather end things on good terms than drag it out and end up bitter. The breakup hit me hard at first. I found myself second-guessing my decision, wondering if I should have been more willing to compromise. I threw myself into work and spent a lot of time rewatching my favorite horror films for comfort. But as the weeks passed, I started to feel a sense of relief. I no longer had to worry about censoring myself or changing my home to meet someone else's expectations. I could fully embrace my passion without feeling guilty about it. I decided to use this time to really lean into my love for horror. I started a horror-themed podcast with a friend, reviewing classic and obscure films. We've only done a few episodes, but it's been a blast. We've even started to gain a small following, which has been really exciting. I also reached out to a local haunted house attraction and offered to volunteer. They were thrilled to have someone with my enthusiasm and knowledge of horror tropes. I've been helping them design new scares for the upcoming season, and it's been incredibly fulfilling. It's reminded me of why I fell in love with horror in the first place, the creativity, the artistry, the way it allows us to explore our fears in a safe environment. As for my home decor, I've actually added to my collection. I found a vintage Dracula movie poster at a flea market that now has pride of place in my living room. Every time I look at it, I'm reminded that staying true to myself was the right choice. I've also started reaching out to other horror fans in my area. I joined a local horror film club, and it's been great to connect with people who share my passion. We have weekly movie nights where we watch and discuss classics and new releases alike. It's been refreshing to be around people who appreciate my collection rather than judge it. I'm still processing the end of my relationship with Patricia, but I'm feeling optimistic about the future. I've learned a lot about myself through this experience. I've realized that while compromise is important in relationships, it's equally important to stay true to who you are. I'm focusing on personal growth and pursuing my passions without compromise. Who knows? Maybe I'll meet someone who shares my love of all things spooky. But for now, I'm content being surrounded by the things that bring me joy, and I'm excited to see where this new chapter of my life takes me. Update 3. Hey everyone, it's been a while since my last update, but I wanted to share some unexpected developments. About 2 months after my breakup with Patricia, I got a surprising message from her sister Amy. Remember her? She was the one who initially caused a scene at the birthday party. Amy apologized for her behavior that day and for the pressure she'd put on Patricia regarding our relationship. She explained that she'd been going through a rough patch in her own marriage and had been projecting her issues onto us. Apparently, she and her husband had been arguing about their different parenting styles, and she'd been feeling insecure about her choices. Seeing my unconventional home decor had triggered those insecurities, leading to her outburst. What's more, Amy revealed that her oldest son, 11, had become fascinated with horror movies after seeing my collection. Instead of being traumatized, he'd developed a keen interest in special effects and costume design. He'd been watching behind-the-scenes features on YouTube and asking questions about how different effects were achieved. Amy asked if I'd be willing to talk to him about my collection and maybe show him some of the behind-the-scenes features on my horror Blu-rays. I was hesitant at first, given our history, but I agreed to meet them at a neutral location, a local coffee shop. To my surprise, it went really well. Amy's son was full of questions about how different effects were achieved, and I found myself enjoying the chance to share my knowledge with someone so enthusiastic. We talked about the evolution of practical effects, the artistry behind makeup design, and the storytelling techniques used in horror films. It was refreshing to see the genre through the eyes of someone discovering it for the first time. This led to an unexpected friendship with Amy and her family. We've had a few more meetups, and I've even lent them some of my more kid-friendly horror movies. It's been nice to have a positive connection to that part of my life. Amy's son has started creating his own monster makeup designs, and she's been sending me pictures of his progress. It's been rewarding to see my passion inspiring creativity in someone else. As for my personal life, I'm still single, but I'm not in any rush. My podcast has really taken off. We even got to interview a famous horror director recently. It was a surreal experience to talk shop with someone whose work I've admired for years. Our listenership has grown, and we're starting to get recognized at local horror events. My work with the haunted house has turned into a part-time job designing scenarios. I've been able to use my knowledge of horror tropes and history to create some unique and scary experiences. It's been a great creative outlet, and I'm considering pursuing it more seriously in the future. I've learned a lot from this whole experience. While I don't regret standing my ground about my home and my passions, I've also realized the importance of being open to unexpected connections and opportunities. I've found that sharing my enthusiasm can lead to positive interactions, even with people who initially didn't understand or appreciate my interests. Life is full of surprises, and sometimes the things that seem to push us apart can end up bringing us together in new and interesting ways. I'm excited to see what the future holds, both in my personal life and in my horror-filled world. Who knows? Maybe one day I'll open that horror museum I've always dreamed about. For now, I'm just enjoying the journey and staying true to myself.